Hello and welcome to Unpacking Power, Privilege and Structural Violence, a collaborative podcast series hosted by the University of Cape Town Faculty of Health Sciences Student Societies. Follow with us as we join the ongoing conversations that are being held around the world about dismantling intersecting oppressive systems, and dig into what this means for us in spaces we occupy as Faculty of Health Science students, future health professionals, and members of a complex and unjust social system. This is the final episode of the 3-part podcast series, which will culminate in a live interactive webinar where series speakers will join us to elaborate on the content shared throughout the series and answer some of the questions that have come up. You can post any and all your questions on the Google form linked in the description. This is part 1 of the 3rd podcast in the series and is entitled Campus Perspectives on Racism, Decolonisation and Occupational Consciousness. In this installment, we, as the UCT Surgical Society and the UCT Health Sciences Student Council, are bringing you an incredible speaker to end off the podcast series, Prof. Elelwani Ramugondo. She is an icon at UCT, here to enlighten us with her insights as to how we as students can combat racism in our classrooms, our campus, and in the broader society. In this episode, we will touch on implementing decoloniality in a practical way, as well as what a pedagogical approach to freedom looks like, and how this translates into the working world.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of our podcast series. My name is Sipho Ndereya, and I am the representative host from SurgSoc. And today I'll be co-hosting with Siyavuya Fikamva, the representative host from the HSSC. We're so excited to welcome this episode's speaker, an iconic woman in the Faculty of Health Sciences and a pioneer in our university's transformation efforts. Prof. Elelwani Ramugondo. Prof. Ramugondo served as the head of occupational therapy at UCT from 2010 to 2013 and as a special advisor on transformation to the Vice Chancellor. She has also acted as the chair of the Academic Freedom Committee and co-chair of the Curriculum Change Working Group. We are so excited to have Prof here to share her insights into occupational consciousness, what building a lens of decoloniality to view our curriculum actually looks like, and for her to weigh in on what we can do as health science students to combat racism in the midst of the global crisis. So without further ado, welcome Prof. Ramugondo.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be doing this.
Right, so Sia's just going to open up with the first set of interview questions.
Okay. Hi again, Prof. Ramugondo. And just to begin with, I would like us to just talk about decoloniality and transformation, which has really been some form of buzzword around faculty and the university for quite some time now. And I would like for you to tell us about why it is important in our faculty and what it means actually, and how we can actually move on to telling people that think that we are dwelling in the past as students, or whoever's doing social justice work, and how this coloniality and imperialism actually seeps and how it looks like in the roles it takes in the faculty. Would also like to just know about what the faculty's history with coloniality has been and imperialism, and what work in a way has been done by the faculty in actually addressing this, and how the students' protests have influenced faculty members and faculty policy into moving beyond that a historical, a socio-political stance that the faculty once took. That's quite a mouthful, but I hope you can cover quite most of them.
No, thank you for reminding me of those questions that was lucky to have you sent to me beforehand. It really I was very excited when I saw the questions, I must just tell you, because to me it signaled that we have a student body that is fully engaged with the issues that beset us globally, and that you are of the generation that can claim to be conscientized just as much as some of us would say about the 1976 generation. And of course, each generation has its own ways of interpreting what society they find themselves in, and what that means for what they are studying and seeing as possible contributions through what they are studying, and what their future world of work should look like. So I'm happy that you've given me the option to speak either on decoloniality or transformation, because you referred to both. And I'm going to take the gap and just declare that I feel more comfortable talking about decoloniality rather than transformation. Transformation I find difficult because it's such a all-capturing concept. It can mean anything. You know, effectively, it just means change. So it doesn't tell you change from what to what, from where to where. In fact, you will pick up that oftentimes in business spaces, people talk about transformation when they're effectively just talking about changing the ways they've done things. So moving from one technological platform to another is transformation. And I find that decoloniality is more precise. It tells you that we want to shift from a colonial way of being and doing in the world to a decolonial way of being and doing in the world. So it's very clear. And what I also like about decoloniality, and even if you talk about decolonization, is that these are not new forms of resistance by people who are oppressed. Anyone can tell you that at the first instance of a slave or a captured individual being taken for, colonial reasons, to serve as a captive where their labor was needed to build empire, there was already then an understanding of what decolonization is. That resistance that those who fought against the human traffickers of the era that often is referred to as the transatlantic slave trade already started resisting. So this is not a new term. So always remember to remind those who want to tell you that decolonization or decoloniality is a fad. It will taper off. No, it is just a reconstituting of the forms of resistance that are needed for the times that we live in. The other part about decolonization or decoloniality that I find critical is that there is no ambiguity about racism from a decolonial perspective. So there is already a recognition that racism is embedded within coloniality. So when we talk about decolonization and decoloniality, we are already signaling that our efforts are towards a world where racism no longer exists. And it becomes therefore very important to define what racism is, because if you don't define it, again, you will find yourself explaining yourself ad nauseum in ways that sometimes can just remind you that sometimes people don't want to actually hear you. But if you begin to indicate exactly what you mean by racism, it helps. So let me know once the screen begins to indicate that my document is showing. Okay. So there's always an issue with technology when you do this, because, all right, we're getting there. It's just slower. Okay. So I have a preferred definition of racism. There are many definitions out there, but this definition I prefer because it captures completely what my own understanding of racism is from where I find myself. So this is not because I like the person who puts forward the definition, or I find the words that are on the screen interesting in any way. It's really just because this definition speaks to my everyday lived reality. And those who I share a collective identity of being Black. So Grossfugel puts forward this definition, which says racism, which is a dehumanizing force, okay, is a global hierarchy of superiority and inferiority along the line of the human that has been politically, culturally, and economically produced and reproduced for centuries by the institutions of the capitalist, patriarchal, Western-centric, Christian-centric, modern colonial world system. Racism can be marked by color, ethnicity, language, culture, and or religion. So I want you to focus particularly to this part where racism must be understood as a dehumanizing force, right? I mean, if someone is dehumanized, basically we are saying that they do not deserve first to be human, but we are also making indications that such a person or the group to which they belong should not exist. Okay, it's as simple as that. I'm going to stop sharing for now, and then we'll come back and continue. But I want to first tie up the link between coloniality and racism. I've started saying something which to many may sound very harsh. I started saying this about 2-3 years ago around how racism effectively is genocidal. Okay. Racism causes death. Okay. It sounds harsh, but if, again, you think about a dehumanizing force, right? Which has a distinction between people where some deserve to be human and others don't deserve to be human. It does escape imagination that the final result of racism is death. Right, so I speak about genocide at the point of colonial encounter, okay? And I make the point, I make a proposition that genocide at the point of colonial encounter is not only a historical event, but an ongoing phenomenon as a function of coloniality. Okay? And with that understanding of genocide, I am supported by someone called Raphael Lemkin. Raphael Lemkin came up with a definition of genocide, which really speaks to me. And he speaks about how genocide is not necessarily meaning the immediate destruction of a nation, except when accompanied by mass killings of all members of a nation, but rather genocide signals a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups, with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves. Okay? And at this point, I would like for you to think of a name called Patagonia, right? When I say Patagonia, for some people, the first thing that comes to mind is a brand, right? A brand of shoes, clothing, and perhaps leather bags, right? It takes a bit of historical attention and analysis to remember that Patagonia is a place on earth in South America with people that were indigenous to that part of the world. Now, when you go to Patagonia, do you find those indigenous peoples? And the answer is no. You can no longer find indigenous populations that inhabited Patagonia before the Spanish invasion. So the question is, what happened? Did the Spanish people come in and just start killing them? No. With time, after the Spanish invasion, Patagonia became a shared territory between Argentina and Chile. And these countries, and I think Chile in particular, I could be wrong in terms of which of the two countries invited Europeans to come and occupy land in Patagonia and start farming, okay? With the effect that indigenous populations no longer had space to pursue their hunter-gathering ways of sustenance. So at the point that they saw cattle and they were no longer able to hunt, they obviously did what would be very reasonable, right? Kill a cat, a cow, kill a goat, whatever, and feed your family. And it was at that point where there was permission to shoot those that were stealing cattle, right? So beyond that, there was also encroachment into the ways of living of these indigenous populations and then with time, they were simply wiped off, right? Indigenous populations in New Zealand, the Maori, the Aboriginals of Australia, the Khoisan, right? On this continent, Basarwa, everywhere you find that indigenous populations dwindle off and are replaced by other populations. Now, what is particularly useful about what Raphael Lemkin says is that it's not so much that these people are killed deliberately, but it is that the essential foundations of what makes them a nation are destroyed, right? And you need to think very carefully about what these essential foundations are. And in my mind, I've become clearer that here we're talking about land, We're talking about spirituality. We're talking about language. We're talking about food security and diet. We're talking about culture. And when we think about culture, for me, as an occupational therapist, what comes to mind immediately is the arts and play. You know, those things that people take for granted. But I'll tell you, a nation that no longer is in charge of its own trajectory will begin to see that the arts and the ways of playing no longer make sense, right? Generations no longer can have a coherent conversation about that which is called art, that which is called play, regardless of what age the person, you know, we're talking about. And Lemkin also identifies specific technologies of genocide, right? And I must just give you a bit of background in that this Raphael Lemkin comes to this definition of genocide from witnessing his own people being destroyed this way over time, right? This is during the times of Hitler. Raphael Lemkin was a Polish Jewish lawyer, so in Poland, and beginning to see what is happening to territories that Hitler wanted to occupy and Germanize. So Hitler had a very clear strategy. So for those people that looked like Germans, like the Dutch, for instance, he decided they were human enough to be Germanized, right? The Aryan race, human enough to be Germanized. But for the rest, all we need is your territory. Okay? Yeah? So and this is happening in the 30s, 1930s, right? After a whole lot of genocide had happened elsewhere. And many people will tell you that what happened in Germany through Hitler was actually the chickens coming home to roost, right? What Europe had learned doing to others in other continents had worked so well that there was no way to stop. If you are winning and you can be a superior race, why stop? Okay? So this is how it becomes very important to recognize that racism in its effect is essentially genocidal, right? I mean, there is so much to be said about the technological tools or the colonial technologies for genocide: political, social, economical, biological, physical, religious, and moral. But I mean, if you think about it, someone comes into your territory and they decide to rename not only places where people live, but human beings themselves. So sorry, you are no longer Sipho, you are no longer Siyavuya. From now on, you are Peter, you are James, right? What does that do to a people? Where you had people with their own ways of governing themselves, you impose new political formations that you alone understand, and you alone as a people who are occupying can have full control of, right? The legal system completely replaced by new ways of seeking justice, ways of educating your people, the language that people speak, and whatever that people did for sustenance or to express themselves culturally, you begin to administer. You say, you're not allowed to operate here with your crafts. You need a license in order to, sell your crafts. And I am the only one authorized to give you that license. So you need to tick a certain few boxes, and then so slowly you erode people's ability for self-reliance and self-determination. So very, very powerful tools. And with time, you can have a people suddenly, people begin to reduce in population. And that's what genocide is about. Okay? I think before I continue, just to give you something that is very close to our lived reality currently. Okay, so we have COVID-19, right? Become a serious global nightmare. But we've also seen that certain populations are disproportionately affected by COVID-19 all over the world, right? We know there's data that can confirm that comorbidities put people at risk, and comorbidities that are named, and one of which is diabetes, and specifically type 2 diabetes. Now, when you think about how people become diabetic and why you have certain populations all over the world affected disproportionately, and then you think about ways of being and doing over time across centuries that have changed, you begin to see the picture, right? So I grew up in Limpopo, a very rural part of the world. So when I see that we are almost, oh, we have unlimited minutes. Thank you. Yeah, so yeah, we've been upgraded. So when you see the way that COVID-19 found expression throughout the province, right? With the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, and then you think about urbanization, right? Can you see how it should not surprise us that you could really find that when all is said and done, rural parts of the world where people still can access the ways of doing and what they put in their bodies, that, with type 2 diabetes being prevalent in, more prevalent in urban spaces, then it follows that COVID-19 would have led to greater fatalities to people of color who find themselves in urban areas, right? We always think that urbanization is progress, right? Well, if you look at people that we know that have succumbed to COVID-19, people we love dearly, you begin to worry about exactly what we are buying into when we think that upward mobility means good health and well-being. Yeah. So something to think about. It's not something that happens overnight. It takes a long time, and as a people, we forget how to live in ways that cultivate health rather than death. Okay, so that's why decoloniality is such an important subject for us in health sciences, because if we understand that coloniality has the ultimate goal of death, then we must understand the responsibility we carry as people that are educated within westernized ways of understanding health. And we need to know how to take what makes sense from our Western education while drawing back to what our ancestors have always known and understood about the good life. Okay. Okay. So I think I've made the point around coloniality and racism being connected. There is a continuation from the slide where I was. Let's give it time and just show me with your thumb up if it's showing, and then we can continue from there. All right. Okay.
Is it? Oh. Okay.
It should be coming soon. Okay. All right. So that's the definition. Takes a while before. So, but what you will be seeing next is how to understand different aspects to racism. Is it stuck?
It's still on the definition on our side.
Okay. It's not listening to me, but well, I think we're getting there. Soon you will be seeing a spider web.
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay. So the first part about understanding racism is that it is systemic. And by that, I simply mean that it operates like a spider web, right? So you have systems that interconnect very much like a spider web. You know, the capitalist system, you know, you can try as a region in the world to have a different approach to wealth and maybe sustenance. Maybe let me not call it wealth. Let's call it sustenance and you know, reasonable materiality for people to be able to survive. But good luck to you, because somehow you are going to be forced into a global capitalist system. Yeah? So by system, I mean that patriarchal. It's a man's world has become something that people take for granted as if that's how the world should be. Western centric. Everything West is better. We all should get it. You know, everything else you must treat with suspicion. You know, you hear about a virus that came from China, you know, and we joke about it. But the thing is, it speaks to how everything else that comes from somewhere else is suspicious, and how a virus in particular can just be located to one part of the world. I mean, the same president who speaks about a Chinese virus also has something to say about countries from the African continent, something that I can't repeat here, right? And then Christian-centric. I mean, if you think about a religion that can expand and find reach all over the world, you will really struggle to find any other form of religion that has gone as far as Christianity has. And this is not to say that Christianity is bad, but you have a certain understanding of Christianity where it is associated only with whiteness, right? So, you know, a Jesus that can only be blonde and blue-eyed, when in fact, it does not make sense when you follow the scriptures and figure out where in the world this baby was born, and, you know, track the lineage and where the Arabic world and the African world and Egypt was, in those times, and how we can, with some confidence, say that Jesus was certainly not blonde and blue-eyed, right? But I think we get into that point where that lie is no longer easy to sustain, and I believe the Pope is beginning to do something about it. But I mean, if you just think about it, to have gone all over the world and convinced almost everyone in the world that the image that you should have of God is a white image, is pretty staggering, right? So this is the power of a system, really. And then obviously the modern colonial world system, in the way that we can understand. And when you think about a system rather than individual attitudes, it really helps to think about how one group of people can have biases, but their biases do not translate to any other group as a collective to suffer, right? So there is no infrastructure such as legal authority or institutional control that makes it possible for that bias to affect a whole collective. I think the person who really puts it so crisply is Kimberly Jones in the analogy that she draws between racism and monopoly. That the system is so rigged against Black people in general, wherever they find themselves, that it's so difficult to win. How can we win? And she asks that question. So understanding racism as a systemic problem is helpful, right? And then the next layer to think about is the structural. And this structural manifestation of racism, you can think of in terms of the sections of the web that touch or connect. And it is about how resources are distributed and opportunities are available or not for everyone, right? So racism has ways of making the structural arrangement such that material resources are aligned with the systemic arrangement already in place. And then next, you have institutions, right? So when you think about the education sector, you think mostly about your particular university, right? But if you look at the institution called higher education, you can see that there's already an alignment of some sort. If in South Africa we talk about research-intensive university, right? We know whom you're going to find in those universities more than the other, right? If you go to universities of technology, you again will find. So again, you're seeing some of the structural issues of racism playing a role institutionally where people find themselves. In the red text, the red text that you see is what people experience because of the systemic, structural, institutional nature of racism. So if, for instance, you look at a drug arrest, right, you can have someone who is a user, a regular user, and it's known that they are a regular user. Maybe they are a Hollywood actor or actress, and their drug usage is known, but it's not a problem. And that person doesn't ever get arrested, or if they get arrested, they don't stay long in prison, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know you know of many names who are Hollywood actors that you will put here, right? But then you think of George Floyd, right? He's just one. But how many people like George Floyd are killed during a drug bust, right? Breonna Taylor, okay? A name that is not often spoken about. What was happening? Why were the cops in her house? And why did she have to die, right? So you already, when you talk about the wealth gap and how it's racialized all over the world, right? It can't be that all over the world, Black people are lazy. I mean, many people work extremely hard, but it doesn't matter how hard they work, right? Employment figures in South Africa, Stats SA showed again that the stats are still showing us that if you are Black, and I'm talking about generic Black, but mostly colored and African, South Africans, you're going to be one of those that are likely to be unemployed. And increasingly, we're finding that even those that have university degrees are unemployed, right? Yeah, housing discrimination. You can all of that. You can think of it and say, but how does it look like for someone who's white and someone who is Black, right? I've spoken about institutions. Okay. Now, this is an interesting and a very useful understanding of racism and how it operates. It's drawn from Fanon, and Grossfugel speaks about this quite often, and my partner in crime, Frank Cronenberg, he's my husband. He just helped with the graphics. That, racism operates along the racialized line of being human, where above the line, there's no question about someone's humanity. And below the line of being human, your humanity is always under question, right? And the section above the line of being human is called the zone of being, and the one below it is the zone of non-being. What is important here is that above the line of being human, there's superiority. So there's a certain hyper-humanization. When we talk about white supremacy, we're not only talking about the KKKs or those groupings that during apartheid we had a name for, right? I don't know how old are you, but some of us have that image when South Africa became ready for 1994, but there was a group that was holding on to the past, and there was someone who was a member of the AWB who tried to protect a Bantustan with someone who thought that he could sustain the fake independence of the time. But obviously, this was someone who was holding on to something that could no longer be perpetuated and fell off his horse. But we're not talking about those groupings when we talk about white supremacy. White supremacy is a sociological term for the societies that we live in, which elevates white people as the norm for human, as the ideal humanity, where a lot happens to mitigate any form of oppression just because of race, right? If you think again of those examples that I used about a drug arrest, what is it that mitigates I'm moving too fast. What is it that mitigates against oppression in the zone of non-being? Is the materiality of domination, which is basically one that functions around regulation and emancipation. So someone who is white and has a confrontation with the police can easily access the legal courts and have their rights upheld, right? They can easily use the legal system to make sure that they are not treated inhumanely, right? Whereas on the other side, what you find as materiality of domination is violence and dispossession, right? And again, the George Floyd example is useful in that there is no other way to negotiate out of the predicament that you find yourself, because that knee is on your neck, stopping you to breathe. But we don't have to go very far. Marikana, if you think about it, you have a people who are engaged in a labor dispute, right? We're talking about salaries that can be negotiated with labor, the Labor Relations Act available to draw from for unions and for employers to come to a resolution. It's not the first time that there's been labor relations dispute. Even when the apartheid state had the majority of workers who were Afrikaners in the mines or maybe at ESCOM, you never heard of a massive killing of workers because of a labor dispute, right? But Marikana happens, and there is hardly any uproar, except now and again there's a reminder. But we have shown as humanity that we have some tolerance for violence against Black people that leads to death. We have cultivated that tolerance for violence and dispossession leading to death for Black people because we have bought into this racialized line of being human. It's subconsciously embedded within us, right? And the circling circles that you see are really just showing you that they, even as much as you want to escape, the circle in the middle is still around race. That you can be slightly better off, maybe because of your class, but it doesn't take long for you to not even have your class mitigate against your oppression. There's a very, very powerful example in thinking about Obama, right? So he's president, he goes into the White House, he comes out, imagine him wearing a hoodie in some neighborhood in the US where nobody knows he is Obama. He gets stopped by cops and he resists arrest. Would it surprise us that he receives the same fate as George Floyd? No. Yeah. So this is why it is important to think about anti-Blackness in relation to racism. That it's not just that there is a sense of superiority or inferiority, there is a negation of Black people's humanity. Now, the worrying and sad fact about this is that sometimes there is some co-option, right? That allows for some people in the zone of non-being to feel like they are here in the zone of being, right? So when Obama was president, it was very easy to think of him as better off. Perhaps he even thought so, that, oh, I'm good. But the minute he stepped off, he's back here in the zone of non-being, right? So it's something to think about when we look at events and tragedies such as Marikana, in that even when we have people of color and Black people in position of authority, they function from a place that is in the zone of being, but it is borrowed time. And they will act to perpetuate exactly this arrangement. Because there's nothing, they can't see a Black person as fully human. Because from where they're sitting, it's here where a Black person is still inferior. So internalized inferiority operates whether you are given some rent in the zone of being for a while or not. And it's important for people like me who are in a relative position of authority and influence to always remember that the position can make someone like me feel that I am better off and begin to treat others who are worse off as if I will always be here. Okay, I think I'll stop there for the next set of questions. I think, yeah, it's been a very long answer to a very long list of questions.
This marks the end of part 1 of episode 3. Take a break, reflect, and join us for part 2 of episode 3.